Here's for another reading roundup. This time, kind of a movie roundup as well. Also, I apologize in my videos if my chair ever squeaks. I'm just a restless person. I can't help it. I'm sorry. But yeah, I've got 3 books to talk about and 3 movies, 2 of which are rewatches. I'm going to start off with 2 of the movies. Why not? So I watched the adaptation for We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. So first off, the movie was actually a pretty faithful adaptation to the novel. It doesn't stray too far from it. There's only a couple things that's really different. One of them is a spoiler. Let's just say that there's a certain violent act near the end that does not happen in the book. And I actually kind of like that addition in the movie. It doesn't need to happen, but it's kind of like that shocking sort of twist, you know? Especially if you've read the book, you're like, I know how everything's happening. And it's like, oh. So that's pretty cool. Another thing they changed that I hate is the fact that they made the what's the cousin's name? Charles. They made the relationship between Charles, the cousin, and Constance like a weirdly incestuous one. No, that's not how the book was at all. Yeah, he was trying to like come into the household because he wanted the fortune, the family fortune, but he was doing it in a way of like, here, let me show you that I'm responsible so that, you know, you could rely on me for all your financial stuff. You might be able to give me the reins to all of that. Not like, oh yes, let's become a couple even though we're cousins. No. Other than that, movie wasn't too bad. There is a couple of instances of, like right in the beginning, there's the scene where Mary Cat is walking into town and there's like this foreshot of the mushrooms that she likes to talk about, the death cap mushrooms or something like that. And they're so horribly CGI. It's like, why the fuck do you need to have CGI for mushrooms? And also, if you do need CGI for mushrooms, how is it so bad? Didn't this movie come out in like 2017 or 2018, I want to say? I feel like CGI for still plants should be pretty fucking good. And then like right after that, when she's at the gate to the property, the gate looks really fucking fake. The brick or rock columns on each side of the metal gate looks foam and painted. How did they fuck that up so bad? Anyway, other than that, I didn't really see any other times where there was like obviously fake stuff like that. But the cinematography was kind of ugly. Like the color palette was fucking gross. Who chose the colors for that movie? Because it is so visually unappealing. I actually looked up the cinematographer. His name escapes me right now, but looking at his filmography, nothing of note stands out, so not to bash on the poor guy, but there's probably a reason why he doesn't have more movies under his belt. I wanted to talk. I have horrible lighting, I got a horrible setup, and I'm horrible at editing, but I'm just a fucking booktuber, film tuber, I don't know, YouTuber wannabe. Just roasting myself. Alright, so yeah, all in all, I did like We Have Always Lived in the Castle, the movie film adaptation. The cast was great. And like I said, for the most part, it stays pretty well in the realm of the story. Like, there's a lot of the scenes like ripped directly from the book, and did a pretty good job. And all the acting was great. It's just visually not the best, and I didn't like the incest. That rhymed. God, I hate myself. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. I thought it was really good. There's definitely parts that I was laughing out loud. I mean, it's parts that were in the book, too. The book has, like, that subtle dark humor to it. And I was glad to see that the movie brought that to the table as well. Especially Julian. Oh man, Crispin Glover as Julian was fucking great. Another movie I rewatched Horns, which is an adaptation of the Joe Hill novel. And if you've seen any of my earlier videos, you might have seen the one where I talked about how much I loved that novel, and how the novel came into my life at the perfect time. There's just so much about the novel that felt very cathartic. And when I watched the movie the first time around, I liked it, but I didn't love it. I gave it a 3 out of 5. I didn't like how it changed some stuff, and like there's some subplots that feel like a very Hollywood revenge plot. You know, when Egg is going around to different people and exacting revenge on them, like punishing them. It was like, really? Like, come on. But it's still fun. It's really not anything too bad. It just felt a little bit out of character for Egg's characterization from the novel at least, but it's fine, I guess. And there's some other stuff they changed. Like, they changed Lee's character and some slight stuff near the end. I can't remember exactly how the book ending went, because I feel like the ending was a lot different in the movie, but I can't really remember. That being said, I also did initially watch it the first time around pretty fresh after I read the book, so I was very much still in the headspace of the novel, if that makes any sense. Because you spend so much time in a novel with these characters in this world, you grow very much attached to everything, and if you don't give yourself enough time to kind of disconnect from that a little bit before you watch the movie, a lot of times you'll end up being a lot more disappointed than you might have been if you waited, I feel like. And I think evidence of that is when I just rewatched Horns the other day, because I liked it a lot more this time around. I think I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 on my Letterboxd, I want to say. It's in no way anywhere near the excellence of the novel. But at the same time, so many of those emotions that the novel were able to invoke in me, I was able to feel again, I guess, is the best way to say it, while watching this movie. Like, the movie itself does have a really good, like, emotional depth to it. And I don't think I picked that up very much on the first watch, but like, it is very, like, yeah, like, there are some parts of the movie that kind of really gets you, like, not in a tearjerker sort of way, but like, it touches you in some form or fashion, or at least it did me. And maybe that is because it was making me think of the book counterparts to those scenes, but I don't know, I really think, especially the use of all the fantastic music that they choose for the movie. There are some scenes where the choice of music is so perfect and beautiful, and it really enhances the mood, especially when it's an emotional scene that was like, man, that really makes me feel something. I really liked it. Like, in no way was I don't want to say, some people, when if they hear me say it made me feel something, it makes it sound like I was about to cry, but like, I don't really mean in that way. It feels something, you know what I mean? It made me feel nostalgic, or it made me feel inspired or hopeful, you know what I mean? Something like that. Like, it's different for different scenes, I guess. Well, it's like the song that's at the end of Fight Club, the Pixies song, is in this movie as well, and it's during one of the flashback scenes to Iggy's childhood. I'm not really a listener of the Pixies, but I've definitely heard them in different movies where, like, they're such a perfect fit for the scene. Like in Fight Club and in Horns. Like, I don't know the name of the song, I'm sorry, but God, it really just makes you feel nostalgic during that flashback scene. You know what I mean? Oh, and it made me kind of think like, man, I wish I could go back to my childhood, even for just like a little moment. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Or the scenes with the treehouse, like they have some like atmospheric piano notes, chords, stuff, whatever. I don't know. It's just one thing I really did not pick up on my first watch of the movie was how good the music was and how much it enhances like every scene. It was, oh man, it really works too because Ig, even in the novel, is a big music lover. So you know what I mean. Even though it's pretty different from the novel, and it's not as good, it still just reminds me of so much about the novel that I loved, and it's still fun in its own way too, where it's still a really good way to revisit the novel without having to reread like the whole thing. However long it would take you to read it, I don't know, but like 2 hours versus like, let's say, probably more than 10 hours, because if I remember right, it's probably like a 400-page novel or so, something like that. And it seems like I'm thinking of audiobook lengths. A lot of times if something's like 300 something pages, it's usually around 10 hours. So I suppose audiobooks pacing is a little bit slower than your normal reading pace usually. But you know what I mean, like, would you rather spend 2 hours to revisit a story or like a really long time? And of course, I will reread the novel probably multiple times in my life, but I'm somebody that I usually wait a long time before I reread a novel. Versus a movie, I'll rewatch like months later or like a year later. I still don't like to rewatch movies like too close together. I know some people that will rewatch in the same week, in the same day, the same month. Like, that's a little much for me, but yeah, like, yeah, I really liked the movie. I appreciated it a lot more this time around now that I was distanced enough from the novel where I didn't feel like I had to nitpick every single scene, I guess. And it just took me back to that world. So yeah, so those are two of the movies. I'm going to save one of the other movies because it's an adaptation of a book later in this list. So the first book I read was All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. And I've never read this author before. So this was a part of... There's a lot of 2023 published books that I want to read because it just seems like that was a really good year for a lot of like horror, thriller, mystery novels sort of thing. So yeah, it made me want to go through. I've got a whole list of ones I want to read. I'll probably do a whole video about all of those books at some point, just like how good of a year was 2023 for published novels and the thriller horror genre. But this one was really good. It's like this really very realistic, grisly, fast-paced detective novel. Well, I don't know if it's really a detective novel, but it follows the sheriff of this town. He's the first black sheriff that this town has ever had, and it's in Virginia, I want to say. So he kind of has to deal with not only the politics of the area in terms of, like, you know, economy and all of that, but also the politics of race from both sides. The characters are wonderful. The main character himself is, you know, he's fantastic. I really liked following him. His name escapes me for some stupid fucking reason. Titus Crown. You know, he's such a great character. I mean, he's the sheriff, but he also used to be an FBI agent, and then there's like these... It alludes to there was something that happened in his past that kind of made him stand down from the FBI and go to the sheriff position. Because like, so he keeps telling people like, well, I came back to my hometown because my father had surgery and stuff, but you keep getting this idea that like something else happened, you know, he's not telling us. So it's really cool how there's that internal conflict. And then he's also dealing with a serial killer throughout this whole thing. So not only is he dealing with all the politics and all like the, just everybody in town seems to have something against him for some reason or another. Then he also has to deal with the serial killer. There's this guy who's on the board of directors of the town that keeps coming in and acting like he's Titus's boss and demands all this stuff. And you feel so frustrated for Titus. Like, you feel so angry for him, you know what I mean? Like, just let the man do his fucking job. But that's how it is in real life. It is so realistic, you know what I mean? The whole town feels real. All the characters feel real. Everything feels so fleshed out and three-dimensional. It does not feel like an imagined world. This feels like we're reading about something that actually happened. And yeah, like, there's a lot of stories where that's the case, but it's hard to explain it. But there's just some times where it just feels especially like there's no way this could have been from someone's imagination. It's just too fleshed out and good, you know what I mean? Like, I feel that way about a lot of Stephen King novels, but like this novel is definitely one of them too. And honestly, like, another thing that I loved about this novel is S.A. Cosby's prose is so elegant and so poetic. He has all these lines that are just so, like, fucking good. Like, oh, sometimes you have to, like, pause and appreciate it, you know what I mean? Like, I want to get a physical copy of this book, because I listen to the audiobook, like I said before, and I want to just fucking annotate it and, like, underline all, like, the best quotes, because there are so many. There's at one point, there's, like, a bigger character, you know? And he's talking about his button-up shirt, and he says something about one of the buttons doing the work of Hercules, you know, because it's like so tight against the guy's stomach. Oh, it's so good. I love it. And it's like a very grisly, very violent novel, but it is so, like, emotional at times, you know, and just overall, like, it can be very pretty. Like, it balances so much so well. It balances, you know, gory, grisly violence with elegant prose and, you know, really good bonds between characters, but also, like, very, like, testing bonds as well, and, like, political and racial climate that is hostile, but there's also that glimmer of hope, and there's also, you know, the potential of change. It is so good. I had to give this a 5 out of 5. There was just no way I couldn't. So I highly recommend that novel. If anybody likes any kind of, like, crime thrillers, oh, that one's really good. I will say, like, yeah, the serial killer himself isn't the most unique serial killer. I did see a lot of people leaving reviews about that. And honestly, it kind of even goes into Titus's FBI background, how he's able to profile serial killers. And there's times where he's talking about the serial killer and what he thinks that the guy's motives are, why he's doing stuff. And somebody's like, well, that makes it sound like every other serial killer. And the guy's like, well, I mean, honestly, a lot of them are a lot alike, you know? And it's very realistic, because it's true. A lot of serial killers, even if they, like, seem like they're so much different, you know, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, all these different people, you boil them down to it, though, like, while they did different stuff, they're kind of up from the same mold a lot of times, you know? Real life serial killers are kind of boring in that regard. A lot of them are just kind of textbook psychopaths, you know? Of course, you get the ones that break the mold here and there. Titus even talks about that as well. I think there's enough, though, with especially the connections between certain characters, that the serial killer is interesting still. It just balances that, keeping him realistic and also, like, interesting enough where, like, you're not totally bored, I guess. I think it's really well done. Serial killer does some weird shit. There's some really good plot twists, so, I mean, I don't know. You kind of have to have that trade-off. I was about to say you can't have every serial killer be Hannibal Lecter, but at the same time, Hannibal Lecter was so much more interesting in the first 3 novels, or in the Hannibal trilogy, And then when Thomas Harris tries to explain Hannibal's origin in Hannibal Rising, the prequel, he makes him fucking boring. Because it just goes to show you that, like, if you really try to dissect the psychology of a lot of serial killers, kind of gets rid of a lot of that mystery and a lot of that intrigue. Now, in real life, that's awesome because it kind of makes them less of a myth and more of just a man or woman with weird problems. You know what I mean? Makes them a little bit less scary, in a way, I guess. In media, in like movies and books, though, we like to have our villains be mysterious and interesting. You know what I mean? So, kind of have to walk that line sometimes, I guess. Next book that I read was I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Makkai. And I saw a lot of praise for this novel before I read it. Of course, it's another 2023 novel. That's like a mystery thriller sort of thing. And I had a friend of mine, too, that was really wanted me to read it as well because they loved it. And definitely have some mixed feelings. I'll get into that. One of the big things that I don't want to say bothered me, but it took me out of it at times, was there's kind of this like use of internet lingo. I guess some of them aren't really lingo from the internet, but it just, there's just times, and it's in the narration. If it's in the dialogue, it's one thing, but in the narration, there's just times it just felt like a very how do you do fellow kids type of vocabulary. Like, I just remember one part where the narrator was like, now that person was a vibe. Now, I get that, yeah, like, people in the 60s were saying vibes, you know, as a word, too. But, like, saying it in that way, you know what I mean? Like, where, you know, saying this person gives off bad vibes is one thing. Saying somebody is a vibe and not actually really explaining what the fuck you mean by that, that's very much like a nowadays internet sort of thing. I don't know how to explain it. It just felt so like, no, don't do that in a narration. I get that the narration is in the first person perspective of the main character, but it's like I get that she's giving the narrator like a type of voice, but it is just kind of cringy. It would be like if I picked up a 60s or 70s novel and in the narration the person's like, I walked into the shagadelic room and the person looked very groovy. I would immediately put down the fucking... I'd be like, no, I'm not reading that. And I don't think Rebecca Makkai is like that much older than me. Actually, no, I want to say, I looked her up, she might be in her 40s or something like that. She's not old or anything, but it still feels like, how do you do, fellow kids? I don't know how to explain it, you know what I mean? Another word that I use a lot of times, even in real life and even in serious conversations, I'll use the word trigger, right? I don't really have anything against other people saying that, but when you're using it in a book narration in a way that it doesn't feel like it fits, then it takes me out of it. And there's like a scene she's talking about this one kind of unrelated incident about like a son and their father arguing because the son works at the restaurant that his father owns, and he asked for like a advance on his paycheck, and the father refused to. And then she's saying, and then they were arguing, and how did she explain it? She said something like, there's nothing like arguing with a teenager to trigger them into being angry. I don't know. It just felt very like, for one thing, it didn't feel like the right way of using the word trigger. To me, if you're talking about something triggering your past trauma and stuff like that, yes. Something that's going to make anybody pissed off, I don't know if I'd use that. And again, and it's in a serious thing. It's like you could not have said that in a different way. To me, it just felt weak, too, I guess. It's a very... I always kick the camera. It just felt like a very weak way to describe the situation, either way, too. But, and it's just so much about it that it makes it feel less like the author thought that was a good way to word it, and more of like, I gotta put in all these internet-y, meme-y words. I guess that's not really a meme word, but You know what I mean. Luckily, it does not come up too often. So even though it takes me out of it when it does come up, it doesn't really happen often enough for me to be like, oh, this fucking sucks. But also the prose, the way that the narration is kind of written, it's kind of in that quirky way, if that makes any sense, that I'm not the biggest fan of. I guess like a quirky, bubbly sort of personality is how the narration feels like. Even though the character herself is not bubbly or quirky. In fact, she's like in her 40s, and she's taken a job as a teacher even though she's a professional podcaster, and she is so childish and juvenile, and I do not like her personality. I don't like her as a character, you know? She is so unlikable. I just feel like she always has these very juvenile thoughts all the time, except for when the author wants to try to use her as a mouthpiece for a certain topic, which segues me into another thing I didn't like about this novel, is that I feel like the novel will get very preachy about certain topics and then will immediately try to recant them or try to provide a counter argument to try to seem like it's neutral, even though it's obvious that no, you definitely have an opinion about this. You just don't want, you want to appease those people that also have those thoughts as you, those same thoughts as you, but you don't want to get the people that don't feel that way pissed off at you. And it's like, you should really just pick a side, because it's actually worse if you try to recant it or try to do the whole like, oh well, no, I'm actually neutral sort of thing. Whether it's stuff that I agree with or not, I will say there's definitely a lot of things that kind of align with my views, if that makes any sense. But I did not like how it was preaching to me. I'm that kind of person. And also a lot of the things didn't really actually have to do with the actual plot, so it's like, why put it in here anyway? It would be one thing if you were using the plot to give a message about something, and whether that message is something I agree with or not, I can definitely appreciate that very well. But if it has nothing to do with the plot and you're just preaching at me, it doesn't matter if I agree with it or not, I'm gonna not like it, you know what I mean? It's like there's this whole thing about, it's kind of like a commentary on the Me Too movement, I guess. But the views about the matter just flop around so much. It's like, if you're gonna say something about it, just say something about it. If not, then don't bring up the fucking movement. You know what I mean? Because there's a whole subplot about her husband, 15 or 20 years prior, I want to say it was like 15 years prior, he dated this person that worked at the art gallery that he was selling his art at, and they had like this casual on and off again sort of relationship for about 6 months, and then like now she's going out in public and telling everybody that he was a very predatory and stuff like that. And the main character, like they're separated, but they're still married, and they still like each other a lot. But she just kind of keeps going back and forth between like, oh, you're probably like a piece of shit, and you probably deserve all this, to like, oh, I'm sure that there's some misunderstanding because I know you better than that. And it's like, okay, well, make up your mind. But I don't know. There's just, and then when you learn about like what the person was saying was predatory about it, she's basically saying that because he was in a position of power, even though he was an artist that was starting out and he was actually kind of broke, but she was claiming that he was in a position of power, so dating her was automatically like predatory because of that whole power dynamic. And then she's also saying, especially the age difference, which the age gap is like she was 21 and he was like 35 or something like that, which it's intentionally a ridiculous situation, you know, created by the author. And yes, in real life there would be a lot of people that would have a bunch of different sides to it, I'm sure. But for one thing, this also has nothing to do with anything. It actually doesn't even really get resolved, for one thing, for another thing. It just kind of keeps flopping back and forth between, like, if the author's trying to be like, you should be on the woman's side, or if you should be on Jerome's side, for whatever reason. Even the main character kind of does that. And then it's also like all of the other characters just seem so hostile towards the main character for defending her husband in that. And it's like, yes, again, I'm sure there would be people like that. Would everybody be like that, though? No. There would be some people that would be like, oh yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. But she kind of portrays it that everybody's against her. And I don't know. And then also the main character is an actual victim of real sexual assault. And that is mentioned multiple times. No details are ever given about that, which I guess we don't really need. Not like I want to read about that stuff, because, I don't really want to know details about that. But at the same time, it's really weird how there's some things in this novel that have almost no details given to it, and they're like that. And then there's other stuff that, like, there's too much detail given about it for no fucking reason. It's clearly trying to say something about certain topics and then just completely backpedals so that it doesn't fully commit. And it's annoying. There's scenes where our main character is talking about when somebody's going through some shit. And she's like, oh, it reminds me of some of the stuff that I went through, except I went through, like, a lot worse stuff. But I'm not going to bring that up because she's basically saying she's learned not to talk about her own problems because other people have problems, so then her problems don't matter. And it's like, I get that maybe the author's just trying to say this is only what the main character's, like, thought process is, and maybe he's trying to show the character is a little bit weird in some of her skewed opinions. But it really makes it feel like just how much she says that really makes it feel like the author's trying to tell you, if you have problems, shut up about them because other people have problems. Even if those problems aren't as bad as yours. And it's like, okay, I get that you shouldn't undermine other people's problems just because you have problems, but you're going the exact opposite way. I don't know how to explain that. Or, I don't know what that's all about. I know how to explain that, I just explained it. I just don't understand why that was such a big thing in the novel. The main character, she, like I said, she took a teaching job, and when at this boarding school that she went to when she was in high school, in her last year or so, her roommate was murdered, and they charged one person with it, even though there really wasn't a lot of evidence. There really wasn't that much of a case against him. Well, they keep on saying there wasn't much of a case against him, but the guy actually confessed. He just happened to recant his confession as well. Usually if you confess, there's a little bit of a case. There's not no case against you. But and then there is a lot of, like, contradicting stuff that in the evidence and in the circumstances that makes it seem like he might not have been the right guy. So she's teaching film and podcasting at this high school. I don't know what kind of high school these people go to, but my fucking high school never had any film or fucking, like, film theory, I should say. Like, yeah, there was a film class, as in, like, you could film the school news and things like that. Learn how to run a camera a little bit. Not film theory like in this one, where you get to watch rated R movies in class. Yeah, I'm sure that she's probably teaching, like, junior or senior high schoolers that might be 17 years old, but that's still, like, high school is not going to allow you to show rated R movies like fucking Scarface. Come on, that's stupid. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But yeah, she's tasked the high schoolers with this assignment to take something from the school's history and make a podcast about it, like a 4-episode podcast or something. and she puts down some example, and one of them is the murder of her classmate. And she's like, well, I put that down there just to be fair, even though I didn't really want anybody to take it. But then she basically talks one girl into doing that. And then at first she's like, oh, maybe I should tell her not to. And then she goes straight from that to like, yes, I want these high schoolers to take a look at this case and find details that I missed and that the state police missed and figure this out. You have a lot of faith in fucking high schoolers. Yeah, adults are delusional too, but high schoolers are even more delusional. They will come up with some weird harebrained theory and then will try to like fit any information to that narrative, whether it makes sense or not. Trust me, I know. I was a high schooler and I was also stupid. You really think high schoolers talking about something that happened like 20 years ago or something like that, with no access to real evidence and stuff like that, are going to be able to solve the case better than a bunch of fucking state police? That's stupid. And there's another problem with this novel, is I feel like the age choices in the novel are wrong. I feel like it should have been college, not high school. It would have made everything make so much more fucking sense. I also hate how the beginning half or so of the novel goes by so slowly. Will bombard you with details, even details about stuff that have nothing to do with anything. And then all of a sudden, like a little bit after the halfway mark, there's all this summarization because they get some new evidence, and then after they get the new evidence, all of a sudden she's like, "Oh, the police came. They looked at these things, and they opened up a new investigation. Started doing all this." She just summarizes everything in like a few paragraphs, and it's like, hold on. All of a sudden, now we're jumping through every fucking detail instead of showing us like you were for the rest of the novel. I don't get that. I got to that point, and like halfway through, I'm like, wait, did I miss something? Because now we're talking about this stuff, and now it's like 5 years later, and you've summarized like 5 years worth of shit in like 2 pages after you took like 200 pages to get through like a small amount of oh man, I don't get it. It's like if you're driving down the street at 5 miles per hour, then like right before you get to the light, you decide to somehow go 100. Had whiplash. I get that it's setting up for the third act, and maybe she didn't want the book to go too long, but I mean, that's why you just cut out all the shit that was unnecessary in the first half, and you'd be fine. Especially all the side shit that has nothing to do with anything and then never gets resolved anyway. Then the ending is a little bit weird. A lot of people are I'm not going to spoil it right now. A lot of people are very disappointed in the ending because they feel like certain things don't get answered very well, and it doesn't wrap up in this nice, tight knot. I will say, I do kind of like how it does that, because it feels very realistic, especially for this type of case. And, that happens all the time in real life. What I don't like is how everything else does not get resolved at all. And so you just get this, like, okay, so then why was all this personal stuff introduced if you're not even going to show us what happens with that? I feel like a lot of that about the novel is just, everything that's not related to the case just feels pointless. And there's so much that's not related to the case in the novel. It's like, you could have cut this down by, like, over half of it if you just focused on the case. You know what I mean? But basically, I think it was a good concept for a novel. I just don't think the execution was very good. I think if they changed it from her teaching at high school to teaching at college, would have made things make so much more sense. And also, the main character is just unlikable. A lot of the characters are kind of unlikable. Actually, there might not really be any likable characters in this book, in all honesty. Yeah, I gave it a 2.5 out of 5 stars. It interested me enough to read the whole thing. There are some interesting scenes. Just on the whole, it just didn't feel very well put together. I don't know how to explain it. Not horrible, not good. Don't see the hype, honestly. Yeah. That brings me to my last, I've probably gone on for so much longer than I'm into, like I normally do. For the last book, I finally read American Psycho by Bret, Easton, Ellis. So obviously this did not come out in 2023 like the last two books. This came out in 1991. And I've watched the movie so many times before reading it. So I knew the basic concept and premise and everything. And I knew that the book was a lot different. And the book kind of goes into a lot of just detail-heavy descriptions about everything. And that a lot of people didn't like it because they felt like it made the pacing really slow. There was too much detail. I also knew that the violence was a lot more graphic and a lot worse than in the movie. I pretty much knew what I was getting into. So in the novel, it's in the first-person perspective of Patrick Bateman, who is someone who works on Wall Street, has his own office, makes a lot of money, lives this very lavish, luxurious lifestyle. He's obsessed with nice material things. He's obsessed with nice restaurants. You know, the more expensive something is, the more he'll like it. And whenever he goes into a room, he always analyzes everybody's outfits. You know, he goes, that's where all that detail comes from. Like, he goes through, he says what fashion designer made every single piece of everyone's clothing and how much everybody's clothing probably costs and everything like that. Talks about his home. You know, just all this stuff. And yeah, we just kind of see him living his life. We sense that there's something off about him more and more. And then there's descriptions of him killing people and all this like other horrible stuff, you know, hence American Psycho. He's a psychopath. His relationship with other people is very fake, you know, like he doesn't care about anybody except for himself. He only cares about keeping up appearances. So therefore, a lot of the people that he's friends with, he's only friends with them because it looks good to be friends with them, sort of thing. He sees everybody as a commodity and as potential victims, honestly. You know, it's like this very insightful character study. And, you know, he's growing more and more unstable, it feels like, throughout the entire book, which is, you know, interesting. It's got so much dark humor that it made me laugh so hard a lot of times at things that I shouldn't laugh at. Of course, I also have a fucked up sense of humor anyway. And I know a lot of people do complain about all those details, but to me, like, I thought the level of detail was impeccable. And not just... because there's also a lot of detail and stuff that's not just going through people's clothing and stuff like that. There's, you know... He finds a way to describe mundane things that Patrick Bateman does in a way that feels off-putting. You know what I mean? I don't really know the best way to say why, but yeah, like... like, there's... the dialogue is written so well in this, like, it really feels like he took down real conversations. And yeah, sometimes it gets a little bit repetitive, because real conversations sometimes get repetitive. Especially when you get everybody there is also vain and rich and spoiled and self-entitled, so that all they care about are whatever their wants and desires are. So people are talking over each other because one person wants to be heard because he wants to talk about this one thing, and nobody else cares because all they want to talk about is other stuff. So then they're just like, well, did you know about this and stuff like that? Nobody's fucking answering me. We hear you, man, but nobody gives a fuck. All I care about is where we're eating for dinner, who's going to make the reservations, and then, you know, all that kind of conversation. A lot of conversations are like that. And I can see how some people could get annoyed, but to me, I loved it because it felt so realistic, and it felt like you could really just, the character really comes out in those dialogue pieces of all the people in the book. And yeah, you really just paint this real picture of all these idiots working on Wall Street, basically, because that's kind of what they are. Yeah, they're all like educated and everything like that, but they're so like one track mind, you know? All they care about is sex, drugs, and money, and nothing else, really. And yeah, and Patrick Bateman himself is sometimes one of the worst ones, and other times it isn't. It's weird, because yeah, he does some really awful shit, but then like other people are just so like, you know, nobody's priorities are right. You know what I mean? And so I listened to the audiobook, and at the end of the audiobook there's a interview with Bret, Easton, Ellis, and he was talking about how this is actually kind of one of his most autobiographical novels, because, you know, even though like, yeah, he didn't go out and kill prostitutes and stuff like that, never really had the urge to do that either. When he was young, he did grow up as a young adult in the very wealthy New York scene, and he said, I was just observing all the people that I was around, and everybody, you know, were self-entitled jerks that were all obsessed with the wrong things and prioritizing, you know, stuff they shouldn't be prioritizing over other things, and just didn't really care about anything other than materialism and all this other stuff. And he said, and then I started to fall in line with materialism myself, trying to make myself feel better, but it didn't really work. Which is a good parallel, because Patrick Bateman, he surrounds himself with all this nice, luxurious stuff, but then he's also talking about, like, you know, how he has this constant sharp pain all the time, and, you know, he can't find a way to feel fulfilled and stuff. He's just empty inside, you know? And, yeah, it says a lot about society and about, you know, people's perspectives on their own self-worth, because I think that, you know, I'm not a rich guy making a lot of money on Wall Street myself, but, you know, there's definitely times where it's hard not to measure your self-worth based off of material things like that, especially when you look at other people that seem very happy and they just seem to live nicer. Even on a smaller scale, like, I'll see people that aren't really rich by any means, but, like, they still are able to finance certain things, and I'm just like, man, you know, but it's like, but does it really actually make them happier? Does it really make them a happier person than you just because they're able to get all these things, you know what I mean? Especially when you get some of those people, like in this novel, that are actually really lonely underneath the surface, whether they realize it or not, if that makes sense. This novel, and also the movie too, are very well known for their ambiguity. And I don't really want to get too much into that, because if you don't really know what I'm talking about, then I'd want you to stay that way and then just read the novel and watch the movie and see for yourself. But yeah, I loved this novel. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Like, it was just absolutely wonderful. There's also parts in the novel where he breaks into these chapters where he, like, addresses the listener, you know, Patrick Bateman addresses the reader or the listener, and, you know, basically does reviews of, like, pop artists, you know, Huey Lewis and the News, Whitney Houston, Genesis. It's just funny. There's so much satire, like, use of satire in this novel. It is amazing. It is hilarious, but it is also extremely dark, extremely grotesque, extremely violent, extremely good. And, yeah, and the third movie that I watched was American Psycho. I rewatched American Psycho to compare it to the novel, and I've always loved it. And I think I appreciate it even more after reading the novel. Like, yeah, there's so much different. Bret Easton Ellis has said that he also loves the movie, but he also feels like his source material is kind of unadaptable fully. like to fully adapt it, I guess, if that makes sense. Because a lot of it really has to do with consciousness, and like you're stuck inside Patrick Bateman's head and you're feeling his feelings, you're thinking his thoughts as they're coming. You can't really get that across in the film medium as well as you can in the novel, especially with the ambiguity attached to it. But I'm actually really impressed about how much the movie is able to do, though. And the movie also has, the same tone as the novel. It has that dark humor, satirical edge to it. And I did pick up on the dark humor and the satire on previous watches, but knowing the novel a lot more, I picked up on even more of it. For an example, like the shootout scene and how it's kind of like it goes into almost corny action movie cliche sort of direction. Like he shoots car and it explodes and he's like, whoa, he's all like, wow, and then like he turns around and walks away with the explosion in the background. You don't really question it, or at least I didn't really question it before. It was just like, oh yeah, that happened. But now it's like, I see the satire there. Maybe it didn't exactly happen that way, and that's just kind of how Patrick Bateman sees himself. And that would be something that he would think of too, just the really cliche, corny, popular way to think of that sort of thing. Is the macho action movie style. Yeah, the movie also really captures like how much more surreal everything keeps going. It doesn't get nearly as surreal as the book, obviously, but yeah, it is surprising and impressive how well the movie was able to adapt the novel. Like, you wouldn't be able to do that ever again, I don't think. So they definitely chose the right people to make that movie. If you haven't seen the movie and if you haven't read the novel, highly recommend both. I was expecting once I read the novel that I would appreciate the movie even less, because I'd be like, oh man, because the novel is better, as it normally is. So sometimes that cheapens like the movie a little bit. We're like, oh man, now I can't really see the movie in the same lens that I used to, because I'm just seeing all these things that it could have done better. But I honestly don't know how the movie could have done anything better. They did things as well as they could have. And while it does not, reach quite the status of the novel is able to do because of those limitations, they are... I'm a broken record at this point, you know what I mean? But the movie is amazing. And the novel just enhances it. And I think in order to get the full scope of the story and of Patrick Bateman and everything, I think both mediums are kind of necessary. 'Cause there's definitely some things that happen in the novel that don't happen in the movie, obviously. But then there's things that happen in the movie that don't necessarily happen in the novel, and it fits so well with Patrick Bateman's character and everything. An example is the chainsaw scene, the stairwell chainsaw scene. That does not happen in the novel. And that is a fantastic scene, especially when he catches up to the girl. He's like, I'm trying to gnaw on her leg, and it's so fucking ridiculous and hilarious. I love it. Maybe they added that in because they couldn't exactly film the scene in the novel where he's gleefully walking around with a severed head on his penis, like. Yeah, so that's my reading and my book and movie roundup, I guess.